I got a call from the White House saying, how dare you?
Ironic that the party that calls itself tolerance is so intolerant. People need to make some sort of decision.
It's getting harder and harder to keep your head in the sand. We have about half of people graduating from high school functionally illiterate. It says a lot about the twisted priorities and our government.
How do we fix this?
By firing those who are abusing their power. And if they are allowed to remain in power, my deep fear is that the country that I love and am willing to die for will be lost.
This is going to be a lot of fun.
Yes.
Our audience is going to just love this. Okay, so you're one of my favorite troublemakers. I'm actually creating a collection of positive role models that are willing to cause trouble.
Yes. We need them. We need more.
We need more, right? I want to start with the obvious. Tulsi, you have been a disappointment to the Democratic Party.
To say the least.
Raised you from an early age, I think in your 20s, and they couldn't control you. And so now they hate you. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yes. First, just to comment on the growing group of troublemakers. There was a, former civil rights leader, Congressman John Lewis, who has since passed away. But one of the things that he has often said and been known for was encouraging people to go out and make good trouble. And so I'm at a point in my life at this moment where, I don't hold any public office. I'm not like, oh, I'm employed by this company or that or whatever. People are like, well, what are you doing now? I was like, this is my answer now, because it's a hard question. There's not a one-word answer to that. It's just that I'm making good trouble wherever I can. Yeah. So I appreciate you, your team, and we talked a little bit earlier. Just I've admired you guys from a distance for a really long time. I first came across PragerU's content online and on social media, and just admired how you took different issues. Sometimes they're complex, sometimes they're not, but really broke them down in a way that's very practical, easily consumable. All the imagery and everything else, just phenomenal work in helping us to have a more educated and informed society. That's one of the things where the Democrat elite of today, where we have parted ways. I was homeschooled in Hawaii. I'm the fourth of 5 kids. And I'm so grateful that our parents chose to homeschool us at a time when it was not a thing. I think it has become increasingly popularized, even though there's still a bit of a stigma around it. But through that learning experience, they were small business owners. We had a family restaurant. So we all 5 of us worked at the restaurant in one capacity or another. Just learning great work ethic, seek out information. They never dictated to us like, this is what you must believe or this is what your politics must be. They encouraged all of us to find those answers for ourselves, to gather information and to think critically and to ask questions, and whether they be around themes or issues or topics or even just decisions that we made in our own lives for ourselves, is think through what the consequences of your decision will be, knowing that you have to live with them. I can't live your life for you. And just being raised in that way, I'm incredibly grateful to them for, because even as I was 21 years old in Hawaii, preparing to run for office for the first time, really motivated out of a passion that I had and still have for the environment, and really being custodians for what Mother Nature has provided rather than just exploiters, was what caused me to start to think about getting involved with politics. And a lot of it was centered around clean water. We are the most remote island chain in the world in Hawaii. And there was an instance where somebody wanted to come in and build a landfill over one of our water aquifers, which provided clean drinking water for 30% of the population on the island of Oahu. And so it was, as a late teenager, I helped gather signatures against it. And the long story short was, we won. The people won. And the landfill guy was trying to grease the skids with his friends, politicians, donors, whatever, they lost. And for me as a teenager, it showed me what's possible when, we come together around common cause to make a difference. So when I was about to run for office, 21 years old, not affiliated with a party, no natural, like no lineage of politics from my parents or grandparents or whatever.
No college degree.
No college degree, which my Republican opponent at the time pointed out at every opportunity. What I saw in Hawaii's history of politics with the Democratic Party, but also some key national figures like President JFK and Martin Luther King and some others, I was drawn to a party that appeared to stand for free speech, that seemed to welcome people from all different backgrounds, different ideas, encouraged discussion, stood up for civil liberties and privacy and against the big arm of government overreach into the most personal parts of our lives. These were things that I appreciated and felt aligned with. And so I joined the Democratic Party. In no race that I've run at state level, county, or in Congress, I've never been that candidate that the party has sought out and said, well, we want you to run for office. I was always the unlikely person to win in any of those races.
I'm surprised because you kind of fit the victim bingo.
Well, and that's what was surprised me,
right?
It never, ever, ever occurred to me before until I won my primary in the race for Congress. And in Hawaii, it's a strong Democratic state. You win the Democratic primary, you have essentially won. And what you're talking about, happened right away. It was, maybe a week after the election, I got a call from Nancy Pelosi. I served in the National Guard at the time, and I was just wrapping up my National Guard duty. And I got a call, and she said, this is Nancy Pelosi. Congratulations on your win. We're looking forward to having you in Congress. Would you like to come and speak at the Democratic National Convention on the main stage during prime time about veterans? We'll give you a couple of minutes to do it. And I was like, of course, I'd love to have that opportunity. And what happened starting at that point was very surreal. To have people on CNN and MSNBC around the convention saying, oh, so-and-so famous actor is going to play Tulsi Gabbard in the movie, or all this stuff. A few months later, Vogue called and we want to do a spread and a whole profile piece. And I was asked to be vice chair of the DNC within weeks of swearing into Congress, something that I had no idea. My answer literally was, what is a vice chair of the DNC? And what do they do? What are you really asking of me?
I bet we still wonder.
I know.
Truly.
And it's defined differently by different people depending on who's in charge. But all of these things, and there's so many, I was invited to the White House Correspondents' Dinner my first year in Congress. And I had people who'd been there for a decade. They're like, how come I've never been invited?
Yeah.
And you get to go. I'm just like,
perfect.
But that's what it was. That's exactly what it was, Marissa. And that became very clear as I was 31 years old, a quote unquote woman of color, female veteran, first of two female combat veterans ever elected to Congress. And all of these things very much fit the mold and the talking point of identity politics. I didn't fully see it at the time, but in hindsight, now I know it was all right, we're going to dangle all the trinkets in front of her and show her what this world could look like if she wants to be a part of the team.
Right. I call it the diamond cage.
Exactly. It didn't last long. It was that summer of August of 2013, my first year in Congress. I was a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee and the Homeland Security Committee at the time. I would later, that following year, move to the Armed Services Committee. But President Obama came and said he would come to Congress to ask for authorization to go to war in Syria. This decision that he said he would come to Congress for was exactly why I ran for Congress. I had come from 2 deployments to the Middle East that changed my life completely. I had deployed with the Hawaii Army National Guard, volunteered to deploy on both of those fronts, left my seat in the state legislature to do so. I served in a medical unit in Iraq during that first deployment, where every single day I was confronted with the high human cost of war, both in lives lost, but also in both visible and invisible wounds. I was confronted with the war profiteering that drives so many of these wars that are supported by the elite in both parties. I came back from that deployment completely changed and knowing that I could not go back to the life that I'd left behind. But those experiences are what drove me to run for Congress. So when President Obama made that announcement, I immediately started to dig into why. What does he want to do? Asking the basic questions that all politicians should ask when faced with the question of war or peace. What is our objective? What are you seeking to accomplish? How will you know when you've quote unquote won? What's the exit strategy? What will you do if they counterattack in some fashion? So these questions that are basic, common sense questions, I asked of the administration. It was Secretary of State John Kerry at the time and others from the White House, the Department of Defense, the State Department, in open and closed hearings. And what surprised me most was that even in, again, this is 2013, we'd been at war in Iraq for quite some time. And there were a lot of people who I would have hoped had learned some lessons. They didn't have answers to those basic questions that I asked. Like, oh, we're going to go drop some bombs to send a message. I said, okay, well, how will they likely react to this military attack on their country? Oh, we don't think they will. Really? And so on and so forth. All of that work that I did caused me to conclude that going and launching another war that would be the first strike in a regime change war, which is what the Obama administration was pushing for, would ultimately not end well for us or the Syrian people, and had a strong likelihood we would end up in yet another quagmire, not only between the United States and Syria, but it would likely turn into a regional war. Came out and wrote an op-ed stating this, and immediately got a call from the White House within 24 hours saying, how dare you? Not, hey, tell us more about your position, or how can we provide you with, new information or arguments to address your valid concerns. You're a veteran, you've been deployed to the Middle East, you have a certain experience that maybe we can learn. Nothing like that. It was, how dare you go against your president? How dare you, as a freshman Democrat, you haven't even been here a minute, and you're challenging the leader of your party and one who comes from was born in your home state in Hawaii. It was surprising to me that they didn't care at all about the seriousness of the objections that I raised, the concerns that I raised, and what was really at stake. All they cared about was, why are you not being a team player? How dare you betray your president? And in my heart, they were betraying my brothers and sisters in uniform. And it showed me that they really didn't care. After that, there was more opposition that came to what he was asking. So he never actually came, and it was never brought to a vote. And ultimately, he did not take that action. But that was the first sign to them and the Democratic leadership that I wasn't going to be the one to just smile for the cameras and vote according to what they send out in the email every morning, that I was going to question them and had no qualms about standing up against them when I knew that it was the right thing to do.
Yeah, it sounds like you may have felt like they wanted your diversity of appearance. They didn't really want your diversity of thought. That wasn't really welcomed.
Yeah.
At what point did you realize that the issue that you had with the left was not just about the military industrial complex, but at what point did you say, wait a second, I actually don't even belong here at all, right? Because it sounds like you've just completely left the left.
Yes. It was different things over time. I'll give you an example. While I was in Congress, there was the earth-shattering news about how horrible the wait times at the VA were. I know you remember that veterans were having to wait sometimes a year just to get an appointment. We saw examples of physical abuse from VA employees to veterans that were documented on closed circuit cameras within different VAs. All of these different things were coming to light at a time when the growing numbers of veterans were increasingly becoming post 9/11 generation veterans, my generation. And Hawaii is a strong union state. unions in Hawaii, their history and why Hawaii became such a strong union state was these unions were the voice for everyday working people who were essentially being abused and taken advantage of by what was back then the four wealthy landowners in Hawaii. Without getting into all the history, that beginning of, the good intentions behind labor unions was a very real thing. And if unions had stuck to that, I think we'd be in a very different place. But this legislation that I was a part of and supported in Congress would have made it easier to fire employees, government employees in the VA who were abusing veterans and essentially not doing their job, fired
Wow.
for cause. Because even in those examples, when they have video evidence of this abuse taking place, I think it took 4 or 5 years to get rid of that employee. And so, it made me angry, as it should every American, to see this happening. But I also learned a lot about the stranglehold many of these government unions have on power and how it is not in the best interest of the workers who are there to serve people,
Right.
supposedly. Instead, it became more and more clear that this is a system where it's about political power to feed the bureaucracies and those who are getting the dues that those workers are required to pay to the unions, and helping politicians who will protect the interest of the union bosses rather than the interests of the American people. It really came through. And I had the visit from the union after I took that vote saying, how dare you go against our wishes? Because I think I had probably been endorsed by that union, the American AFGE, American Federal Government Employees Union. And I just found it audacious for them to come to me as a veteran and criticize me for taking a stand to protect veterans and make sure that the VA is focused on caring for veterans rather than protecting abusive employees of the federal government. And so it was things like that over time where, at the outset, and I will say this, is like, well, I try to assume the best in people. I try to find the good in people and say, well, even with good intentions, maybe there's ways to improve it. But the more I learned, and the more I think people across the country are learning, is that those intentions aren't good. It's about power and not the people. It's not like, oh, oops, we meant it to do something good.
No, it's not oops.
It's about power. Mm-hmm. And that's what is so dangerous. And the seriousness with what we're facing now, specifically 2024, this election, I go into this in great detail in my book about what is at risk. This is not a Democrat versus Republican thing. My book obviously talks about why I left the Democratic Party. But this is a situation where we have people in positions of power willing to abuse their position in order to preserve their power, so much so that our fundamental freedoms as Americans is what is at risk.
You talk about the unions. I relate to this so much because, my background is in education.
Right.
And whenever I criticize the teachers' unions, the AFD or the NEA, they attack me for saying that I'm anti-teacher.
Yeah.
And I'm not anti-teacher. I'm anti-union bosses. I'm anti, the corrupt elite. And when you talk about how this problem is really not a left versus right problem, it really is a problem of big government elites, the people who are basically puppeteering this entire space, and the rest of us who are really starting to ask questions.
Yeah.
I think when I say the rest of us are starting to ask questions, the first thing that the left really does or the media does is to try to label us as a white nationalist, like whatever names they've called you, they probably called me and vice versa.
They've called me all those things
all
too.
the troublemakers. Like now we just own it, right? All the troublemakers, we're right-wing extremists, which the truth is we're not. We're asking the questions that we're not allowed to ask. Yeah. And I think there are a lot of people who are in this purgatory space. It started with Dave Rubin. I remember Dave Rubin came into PragerU and I said, you left the left. And I said it publicly, said, don't say that I'm not on the left anymore, right? And you talk about Joe Rogan, and there are so many, Elon Musk. I mean, because you dare to ask, because you are a troublemaker, they label you as a right winger.
Yeah.
But it's really not about that. It's really about seeking truth and understanding that these so-called experts or unions or people who are supposedly helping us are actually really hurting us.
Yeah.
At what point did you say to yourself, I'm done with the labels? Are you done with the labels? What are you?
I am so done with the labels.
Are you politically homeless? Like what do people like you do?
I've always had a problem with labels. And I've had like professional political consultants tell me, even back when I ran for president in 2020, they're like, who are your people? Because you don't fit in with this group and this label. You don't fit in with that group and that label. And like, this is a bad political plan, Tulsi. Like, what you're doing is not going to work out well for you. But because I've always been an independent-minded person. I had a lot of Republican friends of mine, some in Congress, saying, awesome, now you can come join our party and
Here
join
we
our
are
team.
with arms wide open.
Right, exactly. And I had some pretty deep conversations with some of them, just asking them, well, tell me, what is the Republican Party today? Because I can see some very big differences between, a Liz Cheney and a Matt Gaetz, or a Nikki Haley versus a Donald Trump. I think it's good and it's healthy that there is actually space in the Republican Party of today for different views and pretty vigorous debate. Whereas today's Democratic Party, there is none. There is none. We were talking a little bit as we were getting ready about, the Bernie Sanders, who's now very much, if not in name, in actuality, a part of the Democratic Party, and others people who I worked with who were traditionally civil liberties advocates, people who were advocates for peace, people who said, no, we should be challenging leaders who are trying to get us into more needless war. They have largely fallen silent. And this is not a new phenomena. We saw this with President Obama under his administration, that a lot of us who supported him because of those positions he took against the Patriot Act, those positions that he took against more needless wars of choice that are counterproductive to our interests, and then saw how with the Espionage Act, for example, he became the president who charged and prosecuted more people under the Espionage Act than all presidents before him combined. An act that has largely been used as a political weapon. With Daniel Ellsberg, who released the Pentagon Papers. And then you look at President Trump, who's facing over 300 years in prison because of Espionage Act charges, and the double standard that's there when you look at President Biden and Hillary Clinton, all these other people who have done the very same things that he is being accused of. There is so much that's going on that is causing more and more Democrats, independents, Americans as a whole, to be confronted with this reality of how those in power are abusing their power. It's getting harder and harder to keep your head in the sand. But the silver lining there is that I think it's waking up a lot of people who aren't rushing to join one party or another party. But my hope is that they're recognizing that the only way that we fix what is being attacked and destroyed in the sense of our rights that are enshrined in the Constitution, the only way we fix that is if every one of us, takes responsibility and ensures that we really do have a government of, by, and for the people. And lift our voices and cast our votes accordingly.
Well, ultimately, people can't stay in purgatory, right? People need to make some sort of decision. It's ironic that the party or the group that calls itself tolerance is so intolerant, right? There is no tolerance on the left. And when you talk about how maybe people will say that the right is discombobulated, right? Because you have so much diversity. But isn't diversity better than the uniformity that is required on the left? I actually think that the silver lining is that people are seeing that as well.
Yes.
And when you talk about the things that people are waking up to, right? Whether it's the military industrial complex, or the issue with the food pyramid being completely upside down and what the AMA is telling Americans about what is healthy and what is not healthy. Or you just talk about even mental health complex of medicating our children. I mean, these examples can go on and on. We mentioned the unions, the teachers' unions. People seem to be waking up as if this is something new, right? It's like, oh my God, what has happened to America over the last 5 or 10 years? I can't believe what has happened to this amazing country. Can we just go back to the 80s? And part of me says, okay, yes, things do feel like they're way worse. Maybe our eyes are starting to see something, but maybe our eyes have been really blocked from seeing the truth for a long time, because in your book, you outline a history of corruption, not something that has happened over the last 10 years. The New York Times has been lying to America for years, and that is our paper of record. So is it getting worse? Is this stuff new? Or are Americans actually starting to see something that in the past, people like you, elected officials like you, who spoke against the narrative, who broke through that diamond cage, people like you are now actually being able to speak out. Is that the new part here, or are things worse?
I think it's a combination of all of those things. The things that we are seeing happening now and today, their actions are becoming more and more brazen and being done in broad daylight. Whereas in the past, maybe they were done behind closed doors and they were able to keep the secret and put on this show, create this facade of reality that actually wasn't very real at all, because they wanted us to live in some kind of blissful ignorance and believing that they have our best interest at heart, when in fact they have been interested in serving a corporate interest or a big donor interest, whether it be, as you mentioned, pretty powerfully in the area of war and peace, with President Eisenhower warning us back then of what we are seeing today. This is how we know it's been going on for a very long time. Wars being waged and regimes being toppled to help the produce industry in America. There are a lot of different examples that show us that this has been going on for quite some time. I think this is part of the difference is twofold, is now they're doing it in broad daylight and essentially normalizing it, and doing so very often in the name of saving democracy or national security, to get us to accept their power grab and their undermining of our fundamental liberties. And secondly, the skepticism that more and more people have for what they're hearing on cable news. And maybe not, if they're not recognizing it fully, getting the inkling like, hey, all these people are saying the same thing, and looking for other media sources through social media or online or whatever the case may be, listening to podcasts, watching content that you're creating here. People are being exposed to far more voices who have unique experiences and backgrounds than they had access to previously. And this is where I think even as bad as things are, there is opportunity. And I hope even in elections like we saw in Virginia with the election of Governor Youngkin over Terry McAuliffe, who's like, if you could create, a prototype of like a candidate out of the Clinton machine, he's it. He's literally it. And everyone said he was supposed to win that election for governor. It was not even a doubt that he wouldn't win. But what changed? He said parents shouldn't have a right to have a say in their kids' education. And parents heard him. And it didn't matter what he tried to flub his way through retraction. Parents said, no, how dare you in government think you can take away our rights? And they did something about it. And that's the power that we have in our hands if we choose to use it.
I think the fact that they're going after the families is what's really waking people up. The debate about what we should do with our children is in every household, right? Yeah. Everybody has kids, whether they have kids or not, everybody has kids in their lives who they care about. And when they hear that the government should take over family rights, right? Pertinent to children, whether they should get vaccinated or they should have gender affirming care, mutilation and chemical castration of little children with no say from the parents. I think that is really what's waking people up because it's in our homes. These issues. I mean, obviously, COVID had a big impact on Americans where they were like, wait a second, I can't say I'm not that political anymore. I mean, I remember growing up hearing from friends of mine, "Oh, Marissa, you're so political. I'm not that political anymore." But once it's in your home, once it's in your kids' schools, once it's in your body, once you're hearing that Lucky Charms is healthier for you than fried eggs, like some light bulb has to turn on. And you need to say, this is not about politics. This is about our freedoms and our lives.
Exactly. The thing about the Lucky Charms is this is like, are we living in some kind of weird satirical fantasy world where they'll yell cut and like, oh, okay, well, obviously that was stupid. I think it was my first year in Congress. We had a vote that had to do with, may have been the Farm Bill, which is a pretty powerful bill. It sounds pretty innocuous. But you want to talk about big government subsidies. The Farm Bill is a whole thing in and of itself. I believe it was part of the Farm Bill where we had a vote on an amendment that would allow frozen pizzas in schools to qualify as meeting the fruit and vegetable nutrition requirement.
I'm laughing, but we should cry. Really, it's horrible. That's horrible.
But that's exactly like I could not believe it, and I asked the same question you did. In what world does feeding our children in school nutritious food, including fruits and vegetables, how do you make this frozen pizza fit in that category?
Evil.
And how does this happen? Well, there are some pretty massive corporations who make a lot of money off of these mass sales of frozen pizzas in schools. And hey, kids like eating pizza and they might not want to eat, I don't know, tomato soup or something like that, but that's one example of many of powerful corporate interests taking precedence over the well-being of kids and government advantaging these corporations over people. Individual choice and liberty. Like, hey, if you're a parent, you raise your kids, you feed your kids, you got to make these choices for yourselves. I think the most important thing is helping to inform and educate people about nutrition and health and exercise so that we have a system in our country that promotes health and well-being instead of sickness and drugs. There's so much money. Big pharma is such a massive, massive force of power that I think a lot of people started to take notice of because of COVID and these vaccines being shoved in their faces and mandated. Big pharma spends more on TV ads than they do on their lobbyists in Washington, D.C., which I was shocked to hear because they spend a lot of money on those lobbyists and they're everywhere there. But the fact that we are one of very few countries in the world that allows that advertisement which is essentially their public information influence campaign to keep people medicated rather than actually encourage healthy people. It says a lot about the twisted priorities of, again, our government and how easily our politicians are bought and sold.
My reaction to what you're describing is you are there, you're in government.
Yeah.
These people still live in America. They're raising kids in America. Mm-hmm. Their kids, God willing, are going to grow up and marry other kids in America, right? Do they hate America that much? Mm-hmm. Do they really love their positions that much that they're not willing to fight for what is right? I mean, are you such a unicorn? And I know there are a few people like you. But how come our elected officials, the ones that we are electing, why aren't they going in there and just blasting through and doing the right thing? Like, how deep and corrupt is this environment? How do we fix this?
We fix it by exercising the freedoms they're trying to take away, by holding leaders accountable, and firing those who are abusing their power and putting their own selfish interests ahead of the interests of the people, period. So that I think that's important to state because it's easy to feel hopeless and powerless in this environment and like our voices and our votes don't matter. But we have to go back to the system of governance that our founders put in place for us. That is the answer. The problems that we are seeing stem from the fact that we've allowed these people to stay in power as long as they have and abuse it right in front of our faces. We have to take action to fix this. Yes, there are sadly some who will say in private and even some in public that they do hate America, that America is a terrible country to live in. That I had a conversation with someone yesterday about this, that we were founded by racists who created this systemically racist society. Yet they live here and they reap the benefits of living in a capitalist free society. But they don't want to allow that freedom to everybody who lives here. In an increasing way, they only believe in the freedom of those they agree with, or the freedom who live the lives in the way that they approve of, make the choices that they think are acceptable, and don't want to allow the freedom for those who say things that they don't like or who make choices that they believe are wrong. And it reveals how afraid they are of an actual free society. This is the biggest thing that's at stake here. And so you said, well, how does this happen? You know, are all these people just getting into power because they hate America and they don't care about people? I know a lot of people who ran for office with the best of intentions, but who very quickly get swallowed up into this swamp in Washington. And this is people in both parties where maybe like I did, they get a little bit of trinkets dangled in front of their face when they get there, but they, different from me, they actually fall for it and decide that, hey, I really am someone special. You know, I really am someone who wields power over others. This is kind of nice. I think I want to stick around and get some more of this whole insider trading business. These politicians actually think that there's nothing wrong with buying and selling stock based on the information that they know as policymakers and lawmakers in this country, and have no qualms throwing somebody else in jail for doing the same thing, the very same thing. I'll tell you two little stories that showed me kind of the trap doors that too many people fall through. I had not yet been sworn into office. Every year after an election, they bring all the newly elected members to Congress from both parties, and you go through a series of what they call freshman orientation. And it's briefings, it's social events, it's bringing in speakers on different issues, just giving you a little bit of the lay of the land of what to expect, and so on. I went to this social event that happened one evening. I didn't really know what it was. But it was hosted by one of the leaders in the Democratic Party. Showed up there, was on a beautiful rooftop in Washington, D.C. Turns out it was it was all lobbyists who were there. Of course. All lobbyists. And there were 50 new Democrats who were elected to Congress at that time. And so I'm looking around and meeting people and saying hi. And I stood in line to go get a drink. I started talking to the guy who's in front of me in line. He's like, hey, how are you? Where are you from? What do you do? You know, just small talk. And once he read my name tag that I was Congresswoman-elect Tulsi Gabbard, he's like, what are you doing standing in line? It's like, the same thing you are. I want to go get a drink. And he's like, Congresswoman, first thing you need to know is now that you are here, you will never have to stand in any line in this town ever again. And that really took me aback. As like,
as long as you comply.
Yes, yes. But like, I'm the same person that Correct. I was a week ago, a month ago, 6 months ago. What is it about me that makes me different from you? Because now I have a title that's in a placard on a door. But it's a big problem. A few days later, I went through, there were 84 new members of Congress elected in 2012. It's one of the biggest groups of new people coming in. And I had to go to some conference room in the basement of one of the Capitol, meeting rooms. And I'm still finding my way through. So I asked this woman who's a Capitol police officer. I came in the door. I was like, hey, I'm trying to go to this room. Can you please point me in the right direction? Because I don't know. I don't know how to find it. And she said, I'm walking that way. Let's just walk together. I'll show you where it is. Like, awesome. Thank you. So we started talking. And I told her, I said, you guys, Capitol Police, who man all of the entrances to the Capitol, you guys must be really irritated and frustrated to have so many of us new members here lost and just trying to find our way. She said, no, we don't mind you guys. We actually like you guys because you're still nice to us. So what do you mean? And she said, mark my words. And I'm so glad she was honest and straight with me. She said, mark my words, in 6 months, maybe a third of you will still say hello to us when you walk in the door.
Power corrupts.
Yes. Quickly.
So
very quickly. At a basic human level, where you have Capitol Police officers who choose to put their lives on the line to keep members of Congress safe, and you don't have the human decency to say hello when you walk in the door. How are you? A few years later, and in the building where I worked, where my office was, I made friends with the Capitol Police officers who work, because it's, you end up seeing the same people every day. And so it was one evening at the end of the day, I was there at the door and I was talking to them, and I brought them some chocolate macadamia nuts from Hawaii and just kind of like shooting the breeze, hanging out. And they saw someone approaching the door, like heading in from the outside. And they're like, hey, watch this. Stand here right behind the corner and watch this. And so I did. I stood there and I watched, and it was a senior member of Congress walking in. They were invisible to this person. And they told me, and they proved to me what this woman had told me a few years before. Like, we don't exist to these people. I just share these stories because it's a legitimate question that when you've got someone who's running for office and they're coming and having town hall meetings in your neighborhood and telling you about the things that they want to do for you and your kids and your community, they may be well-intentioned from the beginning. But this is where paying attention and being informed and accountability is so important, because in some cases, and I would say in too many cases, in both parties, they very quickly lose touch with reality because they live in this little bubble in Washington where people lay out a red carpet and treat them as though they are special, rather than treating them as though they are people who've been charged with this incredible responsibility to represent the interests of those who elected them in the first place.
The first thing I said to you when I saw you was courage and discernment. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you remember, but I said, Tulsi, I have a hunch that the reason you have the ability to discern is because you were homeschooled.
Yeah.
Because you were never part of an assembly line. You were never part of a machine. And so you haven't been brainwashed.
That's what my parents saw way back when, and why they made that choice not to send us to public school. It wasn't that we weren't allowed to go. One of my older brothers decided in high school, he's like, no, I want to go to public school. My parents said, all right, here's what you can expect. Go for it. He went and he lasted maybe 3 months. And he's like, this sucks. And, he came back and he finished his schooling. But I really do give thanks and credit to my parents for making that decision early on, because they saw the writing on the wall. All parents should have the right to make that choice, whether it's to homeschool or to send your kids to a charter school or a religious school or, a private school or a public school, because we are not all the same. We don't all fit into the cookie cutter assembly line, even though that's it. And this is something I've learned over time. It is intentional to create and grow an entire generation of Americans who are compliant, who receive a certain set of information that has nothing to do with reading and writing and math and science and civics and the Constitution. And, what does all this mean? Who are we as a country? Those are things that, as you pointed out to me when I came in this morning, those actually aren't the most important things to the biggest, most powerful education unions. Mm-hmm. They are not emphasizing that. And it actually shows, and I get into this in the book, when you look at the metrics of performance and effectiveness of our federally controlled education system in this country, we have about half of people graduating from high school functionally illiterate. We have, even in the best performing of schools, only a small percentage of kids who are actually truly uh, literate. And this is so problematic on every level. But with each of the topics that I tackle in my book, I make it a point to draw that through line from the problem, the effects of the problem, and ultimately how it all leads to power. Those who are taking away our freedom, our individual rights and liberties, in this case, the right of a parent to make the best decision for the child that they know best, and to take away that right because of power.
They use also their propaganda machine to make it appear that children who don't go into government schools or organized schools are going to be poorly socialized, incompetent, not able to integrate into society.
Yeah.
And then here you are, Tulsi Gabbard, incredibly successful, if I may say so. You're clearly able to socialize. You're very articulate. You're probably smarter and have a better ability to discern than most of the people who have gone through the washer. The argument that the Department of Education is the only one that can really create a format for the education of young Americans, there's so much proof that it's wrong and that we've been brainwashed to think that the government will do better than the parents. Do you think that there is any role that the government should play in education? Do you have any thoughts on the Department of Education?
Yeah, and this was several years ago when I heard the idea, and maybe it was through legislation. I don't remember exactly the vehicle for this, but someone saying, well, we got to get rid of the Federal Department of Education. And I thought, like, that sounds like a really extreme, radical idea. I don't know about that. Because it wasn't a question that it's not a conversation you're allowed to have in Washington. And all of those threats and those bleak pictures that you've just detailed are what are thrown in your face if you do try to have the conversation. I think it's important for us to question everything, take nothing at face value, recognize what their tactics are to try to stop us from asking questions, and hold them to account and say, okay, if you feel that the Federal Department of Education is critical to our children in this country having a quality education, being set up for success, show me. Show me those metrics that prove your thesis, that prove your point. And they can't, which is why they resort to these attacks and these smears where I think Randy Weingarten from the American Teachers Federation.
American Federation
for Teachers, thank you. Where she said something along the lines of school choice undermines democracy. It makes no sense.
It's actually ironic.
Yes.
It's the exact opposite of like giving people choice.
Usually the case with so many of these things that they say, it is exact opposite of what they're presenting. So yeah, I don't see a role for the Federal Department of Education because I've actually asked these questions, not gotten answers, seen the fear tactics and fear mongering that they foment, and also understand firsthand in my own life, but also the conversations I've had with both parents and teachers, these amazing humans who choose this profession that's tough and it's often thankless and underpaid and all of these things, about how they feel our children can be better educated and informed. And the Federal Department of Education has become a monster that consumes a whole lot of money. To do what exactly? Well, they are dictating to schools and to parents what our children must think and what they must be taught. They have no idea what's good for, local kids in Hawaii, in this small rural town of Waimanalo that has a strong Native Hawaiian constituency that lives in poverty and low income. They don't know what's good. There's a lot of farms. They don't know what's good for these kids in Washington, D.C., nor do they care. The fact that President Biden on the 50th anniversary of Title IX used rules in a backhanded way through the Department of Education to force schools to allow biological boys to compete against biological girls in sports. And if they did not comply, the federal government is going to withhold funding for the free and reduced lunch students, the students who live in such poverty that they can't afford, the $2 or $3 or $4 to go and buy their lunch. That to me is one example of many of the cravenness, the cold-heartedness, and truly the lack of care that these people have, that they're going to say, no, we're going to force hungry kids to stay hungry unless you comply with this woke trans agenda we are forcing down your throat. This is really what I hope to accomplish and why I wrote this book, because there are a lot of Americans who are dissatisfied with our politics as a whole, and understandably so, are busy, raising their kids and working and trying to provide, and that they don't have time to dig into or know about a lot of these things that are happening and have been happening, certainly over these last several years, but even longer than that, to inform people to actually vote in their interests.
Did you ever ask any of your colleagues when you were part of the Democratic Party why they were against school choice?
I did.
They send their kids to private schools. That
Many
is
do.
effectively school choice. They're making the choice because they can afford it.
Exactly.
What's their answer to that?
The public rhetoric that they will spout matches the talking points from the unions. That you will, by allowing for school choice, you will take funding away from hardworking teachers in public schools and public schools with crumbling infrastructure. You will take that money away from kids who have no other option than to go to public school. So you will effectively harm these kids and their education and their opportunity for success if you allow parents the right to choose and divert that funding perhaps to a religious school, perhaps to a private school or a charter school. In Hawaii, there's been, which is again a strong union state, a strong education union, extremely influential across the state, but they found a back door in creating Native Hawaiian charter schools. And a lot of parents have chosen that route, both those who are Native Hawaiian and those who are not, because they saw the opportunity as parents to have a lot of input with their local school about the curriculum, about what classes were being taught, and like, hey, we've got someone who's a great carpenter, let's bring them in and have woodworking classes, or, farmers. There's just so much more opportunity to provide kids with a true education and true learning, and not just, and this was even problems we saw with No Child Left Behind under President Bush, the federal government dictating to teachers, forcing them, essentially, you will teach to the test or your school will lose funding.
Yeah.
The private bullying that goes on from these massive so-called education unions is real. And that's where, even as it's somewhere between 70 to 80% of parents, Democrats, Republicans, Independents, Black, Hispanic, white, Asian, across the board, strongly support school choice. So you would think that even a politician who doesn't care about it would look at those numbers and be like, of course we should support this if you want to be popular.
Right.
So many still either refuse or are hesitant to do so because of the power, the political power wielded by these massive unions who unfortunately use teachers to get what they want.
They do. How do we bottle up your power of discernment? Like, I want to bottle up and sell also your courage. But, discernment is so important these days because we are living in an era where there's so much information. Nobody knows where to get the news anymore and what to trust. Even with politicians, our visibility for our electorate is mostly through media.
Yeah.
And this idea that we would elect our official based on who mops the floor best at a debate, right? Like, that to me is not how I discern who my leader should be. And there are some great debaters out there who I like and I like to listen to, and it's very, very entertaining. Mm-hmm. But frankly, that's not how I think we should choose our electorate, right? There must be a better way for us to discern, to make decisions so that the people who are going to go and make these huge decisions for our country are actually the right fit. What's your advice on that? And do you have any thought? Do you have the same reaction that I do to the debates? I mean,
I do.
You've been there.
I've been on the stage.
Yeah.
I have certain strong feelings about this.
Yeah.
Exactly for that reason. When I made the decision to run for president in 2020, I thought that, and looking back was very naive to think this, but I thought, this is a long shot, takes a lot of money, takes a lot of resources to be able to successfully run for president. And going up against a lot of entrenched politicians, they have a lot more of that than I ever will have. However, I thought I will have as fair a shot as any one of them to stand on that stage and make my case to the American people about the kind of change I want to bring about to the Democratic Party and to the country, both on domestic policy and foreign policy. I learned pretty quickly that was a naive thought for many reasons, but specific to the debates. In all of the debates that I participated in, I had between 6 to 8 total minutes of talking time. Whereas others with 10 people on the stage, maybe they had 20, 30, 40 minutes where the moderators would keep going back to them. Or as with your example, they were master debaters and they were just skilled in that art, which I was not. I came there with a lot to say, but didn't have very much of an opportunity to say it. And I saw how dysfunctional that platform really is. And I saw how people, I think that first debate, it was probably 27 or 28 million people watched it. And with every successive debate, it dropped off radically to the point where it got to single digit millions who took the time to tune in. And it said everything I needed to know. Because it's the way I feel watching a lot of these debates is like, I'll watch it for a couple of minutes.
It's like entertainment. It's like gladiators, going at each other. But frankly, it tells you nothing about the human.
Fight is much more entertaining.
Oh yeah, I love
than
them.
That.
I love them. Right? At least they're actually trained to do that, and it's what we want them to do.
Yeah.
With politicians, the electorate, we want them to be good.
Yeah,
we want them to be good.
Yes.
Our debates, what's going to help us discern whether people are good? How do we discern who is good for America?
I think the very first thing is realizing that the debates are political theater. They benefit the political parties, perhaps the politicians on the stage in one way or another, but really they benefit the news organizations or the shows or the networks that use those platforms.
Or the pharmaceuticals that are advertising on those shows.
They create political theater to draw people in, to get more viewers to watch those ads, which was ironic to see like all these Pfizer ads coming up. And yet, oh no, we're not going to debate vaccines or anything else. So I think the first thing is recognizing the problem. That is the problem. When you recognize that, then it is knowing, okay, I got to find my information from some other source. To me, there's no single source that any one of us should rely on. I listen to podcasts that range a broad variety of different views. I listen to podcasts that have some folks on there that I don't necessarily agree with. But I'm interested in hearing what's the true argument and counter argument around the most important issues that we face. And I encourage people to do that. That's how you get to discern for yourself, what do I actually believe? Which voices and platforms represent more of the things that I care about and that make more sense in how to actually solve these problems. So, don't take what I say at face value. Don't take anything at face value. Don't be a blind follower for any political party or any, news host. We need leaders who are committed to the Constitution and freedom and who are committed to serving the best interests of the people. So get informed, find those answers, ask those questions of those who are asking for your trust and your vote. And then cast that vote. We cannot stand on the sidelines. There is nothing short of our future to live in a free country at stake in this election in 2024. Make your decision as you will, but know, and I go into this in the book, the elite are intent on taking our freedom away. And if they are allowed to remain in power, my deep fear and concern is that the country that I love and am willing to die for, to protect and defend the safety, security, and freedom of the American people, will be lost. When we lose those freedoms, they become next to impossible
to gain back,
to get them back.
We have to do the work. We have
do.
to put in the work. And that has to do with every aspect of our lives. We've been told that we can forfeit the education of our children to the industry that can take care of it for us. So we can just, not worry about it, or that we can just trust all the experts, and every research is something that can be trusted and we shouldn't question and we shouldn't put in the work. And, you talk about the political element. We just have to put in the work. And
Yes.
I know it's really hard to hear because all of us are overwhelmed. We're working full time and we're busy. We have busy lives.
Yeah.
And now we're hearing from people like you and probably from me that we have to do even more work. And so I'm sympathetic that it's
Absolutely.
hard. I am. And I know that the ask is huge, but what can be more important? What can be more important than our country, our lives, our children, right?
Yes.
Those are the things that really matter.
Yes.
I absolutely love your book. I can't wait for people to read it. I just think it is, you know what? I was thinking as I was reading this, it's a great book to hand to somebody who is questioning.
Exactly.
We all have a lot of friends in our lives right now who are saying something bizarre is happening. Something
Yes.
new is happening. I'm seeing something, and just being able to say, you know what? Don't listen to me. Read this book and let me know what you think.
Yeah.
I think this is just so very helpful. Every college student in America should read this book. We'd be in a much better place. So
I would hope so.
Appreciate
Thank
your
you.
work. I can't wait for your podcast to come back
Thank
because
you.
it's brilliant.
I
Tulsi,
appreciate
you're amazing. You're
Thank you
amazing.
for the work that you do, the leadership that you provide at a time when you, as I am, and others who are making good trouble, it comes with a lot of attacks. You were talking about death threats that come in. I'm sure they do it at different times. There is risk to being a voice of truth and courage in this society, which is really a sad state of where we are. And so I know that you and those around you, those who you are empowering with your platform, are inspiring and emboldening others to know that they're not alone.
We're not
and
alone.
that we all need to, in our own ways, in the ways that we can, find that courage to fight for what we hold dear before it's lost.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Won't give up.
Appreciate you.